It's hard to believe that I spent nearly the last year building this Rockcrawler. So let's be honest, before we take on any big project, anybody typically adds up all the cost. You start adding up all the big costs. What's it going to cost for tires, rims, axles, transfer case, seat, steering, all that sort of stuff that makes up the bigger components of a build like this. For me, that's what we basically tell our wives that the project is going to cost. And then we have up here what the project actually did cost. And what those two things are different, for me anyway, is when we talk about what we tell our wives a project's going to cost is the stuff that shows up on the bank statement. That's the big ticket item. Now what the project actually cost is all those small things that add up to be so much, like welding gas, welding wire, hardware, nuts and bolts, all those countless trips to the hardware store, vinyl wrap, aluminum, different various pieces of steel, this and that, all those little tiny costs that just look like on the bank statement, a few bucks here, a few bucks there. Well, me personally, I don't add those up. I just look at the big ticket items. Now with this Rockcrawler, I started off with one big goal in mind. And what that goal was is to try and build a small rear steer Rockcrawler for as expensive as I could. Because the other reason is I didn't want to sell this one. I wanted to keep this one too because I'm partial to it. I just don't want to get rid of that. So what I wanted to do was to build something as inexpensive as I could. With the goal of that, I didn't cut corners in certain areas that I knew I needed for reliability. Those couple areas I didn't cut corners on was putting a nice Atlas transfer case in it, putting 300M chromoly axle shafts in the rear, and chromoly axle shafts all the way around with chromoly U-joints. I didn't skimp on that. The other area I didn't skimp on was the steering. The chassis was my own design that I built myself. I hand bent, hand notched, and welded up the entire thing by myself. I had an idea in mind what I wanted to build, and I just went from there. I essentially built the entire thing around the motor and transmission so that it all fit in there as tight as it could. Now I'm no expert TIG welder, that's for sure, but I have spent some time around some guys who are, and I figure the only way that I'm ever going to get better is to continue to practice, practice, practice. I have a lot of fun doing this, and I like to build my own things. I'm never going to get better at something unless I just try and jump in there and give it my best shot. I got this motor, transmission, and wire harness for just $500 for an entire Chevy Blazer. After I scrapped the Blazer, I got all of this for just like 200 bucks. I tore the motor down and went through it, rebuilt it all for just a couple hundred more. So when it's said and done, the motor, wire harness, and transmission, I have like less than $500 into. So I'm in the process right now of adding a little bit more protection to this back axle. But here you can see this is how I built this entire back axle. This axle's been working just fine. I just want to make sure that there's no way I can get a rock into this nice clean steering ram or into these steering arms. So check this out. Then I built this steering 14-bolt axle. So I made videos along the way on how I did that, and it uses the same 99 through 04 outer knuckles as my Ford Super Duty that I used in the front. Another cost that we often forget about are the heim joints. So the heim joints, they were about the best deal I could find online from bigshocks.com. Those are about $800. And then the steel, that's 2¼ inch DOM tubing with 1.5 inch aluminum pounded right into it. So this is how I built this front steering Dana 60 axle. I built this Ford 99 through 04 Super Duty axle for this buggy. It's got a high pinion, it's got nice sharp steering, and mounted all. The reason I used Ford Dana 60 outers all the way around for this Rockcrawler because it was the sharpest steering that I could get out of a junkyard axle. Another big ticket cost was all the steering components. So I bought one big kit from PSC Steering. That's the front ram, the rear ram, the little heim joints that are associated with that, all the hoses, the orbital valve, and the rear steer valve. I bought all of that as a front steer and a rear steer kit. All of that combined cost about $4,500 shipped to my house. I went back and forth on what type of shocks I was going to run. At one point I was looking at running coilovers, so I had designed it for coilovers. In the end, the air shocks that I originally ordered ended up showing up, so I ended up putting those Fox 2.0 air shocks on this Rockcrawler. This was the first time that I had this thing sitting on its own weight and got it started. It was so relieving after all of that work to see it sitting on its own weight, seeing how low and stable it was going to sit. This was a huge accomplishment. Once I got the panels all wrapped up and got them put on there, this had all started to come together, and my vision and all my months of long work were starting to come together. Now, I joke around a bit about the cost of the project, but honestly, there are some things that I saved a bunch of money on, like seats. I found the seats on Craigslist for $200, where usually seats would be like $1,200 or $1,500, and then I had the harnesses already laying around, so I didn't have to add those sorts of things into the cost of this project. So like I stated before, since I only really tracked the big cost on this project, that's what we're going to talk about. So we'll go with shocks. They're Fox 2.0 air shocks all the way around. I spent $1,200 on the shocks. As far as tubing to build the chassis, the first time I went and picked up a load of tubing, which is, I actually did stick to that, was about $1,200 for 1.75 and 1.5 inch DOM for the entire order. As far as axles, I weighed out every different configuration that I could come up with, and this was just the most, I guess you could say, bang for your buck. And in the end, I spent about $10,000 with building junkyard housings front and rear, and then putting chromoly shafts and 538 gears, Yukon gears in these axles. So right there, the front and rear axle, that's including wheel bearings and calipers and all that kind of stuff, and U-joints and axle shafts, all of that added up to be right at about $10,000. The rims, these are Raceline rims that I picked up straight from Raceline just for about $2,000. I think that's about their going price on their website. And the tires, I picked up these used tires. I couldn't wait any longer, so I picked up these used BFGs. These cost me about $2,500. The Atlas transfer case, just right there. That was another one of the big ticket items. That was about $3,200 shipped to my house. So another cost that we often forget about is the winch. The winch was only a few $100, but then I didn't order the synthetic line with it. If I should have just ordered it all together, because it still ended up costing about the same. So in the end, I spent about $500 on the 9,500 pound winch and the synthetic winch line. The shifter are another one of those random little costs that we all like to forget about from time to time until you have to go to order it. The shifter with the linkage kit all the way back to the transfer case. Add in another few $100 for that. As far as like wiring and lights and stuff like that, I just use real basic stuff that you can order from Amazon. I just can't swing the really nice rigid stuff because honestly I don't use it that much. It's just kind of nice to have those times that you do need it. So another cost that we often overlook is a fuel cell. This is just your cheap basic Jegs fuel cell. So that fuel cell I spent, it was like $200, and then I have a Holley Hydra mat that's down inside there. That's another couple $100. And then I have just a basic fuel pump from Amazon, external fuel pump that had AN fittings on it, so that's another $50. And then I have a pressure regulating valve right here. There's another $80 or $100. So before you're said and done, it's easy to have around $500 in hoses, fittings, and all of that into your fuel system, just doing it with real cheap, basic, easy type stuff. Then we got other parts to the project that I don't necessarily like to add up as well, that we consider those just minor little cost, you know, things like drive lines and U-joints and radiators and hoses and just all those sorts of things that we just kind of pick up here and there, but we never really think of as the total cost of a project.
So what was the final total of the entire project after everything I mentioned? And including one other thing I forgot to mention, which was the Hydro Boost brakes. That puts me in the realm of around $30,000. So the next time you see a used Rockcrawler for sale, I can guarantee you these parts aren't cheap. That's not including my entire labor for pretty much an entire year. So yeah, these things add up no matter which way you try to do it. If I had done a drag axle Rockcrawler, obviously it would have been a lot cheaper. But to throw rear steer in there, there's just no way to get around it. So here's my daughter Emily getting a little bit of seat time in the new Rockcrawler. We've been having a blast learning how to drive this thing. It's been a lot of fun. This entire experience just has been great. It really pushed us out of our comfort zone, and now here we are getting to take this thing out and use it. That's been a lot of fun. Overall, I did run into a couple small issues the first few times I tried to take it out. I call them just shakedown issues. So the first thing that happened is, if people recall, I run the coolant through the chassis, and so I had an air bubble up near the motor that I had to figure out. Once I got that air bubble worked out, that was working just fine. So the next issue that I was fighting, I thought I had my gearing messed up. Basically, I didn't have a very low crawl ratio when I took it out to drive it for the first time, so I immediately jumped to the conclusion that I miscalculated my gear ratio. I ended up gearing it lower, and then still my gear ratio seemed like it was too high. That's when I started looking into the transmission and found that the power wire to this electronic transmission wasn't hooked up. Once I did that, I got everything working the way it should. The only things I'm going to work on is maybe tuning the suspension a little bit more here and trying to maybe revalve these shocks or play around with that a little bit. Overall, it seems to be working all right for now, and we're just going to get out there and use this.
So when I built this entire Rockcrawler, I made videos along the way, almost 40 videos, I believe, in total throughout this entire build on building panels, on building the front axle, the rear axle, how I built the control arms, all the way down to even rebuilding that Vortec 4.3. I made videos about that as well. So every single detail along this has been documented in my buggy build playlist. So if anybody's interested, wants to know a little bit more information, those videos are all still out there, and it has the full breakdown of and all the details of how this thing was completely built. So the last year building this thing has been a total blast. We had a great time. I spent a lot of hours in the shop. So this next year, we're just planning on getting out and using these and just having a good time with the family, getting the kids driving these more, that's been a blast. So I'm really looking forward to the next year. It was a fun project. It was a big challenge, and I'm just glad at this point we're to the place where we get to go out and use these a whole bunch more. So thanks everybody that followed along. This was a lot of fun. Really challenged me to step out of my comfort zone and to try and make these regular videos. Not only to make these regular videos, but to work on this all night and then have to go compile all the footage and set the camera in different ways and try and get these different shots is just a huge challenge. And so I'm just happy we're at the point now where we're at, and hopefully we can get out and get some great content using these things out on the trails.